Della Marsh buried her husband with a folded flag and a bill she couldn't read. The flag they gave her at the graveside, 13 folds, tight as a fist, blue with white stars. The bill came later, on a Tuesday, sitting on her kitchen table where a stranger had left it while she was out mending fence. It said the ranch her husband died for now belonged to a man she had never met. She read the parts she could. She stared at the rest. And she did not weep. She saddled the buckskin and rode to town to see the paper for herself. On the porch of the mercantile, in front of 11 men chewing tobacco and minding her business, the land agent Horace Pell smiled down at her like a cat at a cellar door. "The Widow Marsh signed nothing," he said, loud enough for all of them. "So the Widow Marsh keeps nothing. He already held the notes on every fence in the basin. Hers was only the last one he wanted." But there was a man coming up the wagon road that Pell did not yet see. A lean fellow, trail-worn, a union coat gone gray at the seams. He carried her dead husband's watch in his pocket, and he carried the deed to her ranch folded against his heart. And when he reached her gate, this man who could have taken everything she owned with a single word, he did not reach for the door. He took off his hat. If you believe love is built with two pairs of hands, this story is for you. So before we ride on, do this for me. Tap that subscribe button and stay a while. And comment the name of the town you're watching from tonight. I truly want to know how far Della Marsh's story rides. Leave it below. Then settle in. Because this one earns every mile. Della Marsh had run Blackwater Creek alone for 4 winters. The place sat in a fold of high country near the town of Cedar Gap, Wyoming Territory, in the fall of 1868. It was a small ranch by the measure of the men who counted such things. 200 head on a good year. A creek that ran cold and clean off the divide. A log house Sam had raised with his own hands the summer they married, and a barn behind it, and a windmill that had quit turning the spring Sam left and never turned again. Sam fell at Franklin in the December of '64. She had the telegram still. She kept it in the Bible, between Ruth and the Psalms, and she did not take it out. The ranch was scraped and lean. But it was hers by every callus on her hands. She was 34 years old that autumn. She wore her husband's coat when the wind came down off the peaks, and she wore his patience thinner than she liked to admit. There was a boy to raise. There was an old man to feed. There was a herd to hold together with baling wire and stubbornness and prayer. And precious little of the last 2 left. The boy was Caleb. 9 years old and all knees and questions. He had his father's ears and his mother's set jaw, and he could already sit a horse better than most grown men in the county, though Della would not tell him so and swell his head. The old man was Ned Buckley. He had ridden for Sam's father before Sam was born. His hands were knotted like cedar roots, and his temper ran short in the mornings, and he had stayed on through 4 winters of half wages and no complaint, because he had made Sam a promise once, and Ned Buckley did not break a promise even to a dead man. On the mantel above the cold stone hearth sat 2 things. One was a horse, or the start of one. A cottonwood carving Sam had begun the last winter he was home, whittled down to the shape of a running colt, with its mane just roughed in, and one hind leg not yet freed from the block. Sam had meant to finish it for Caleb. He had run out of winter. The knife marks were still fresh looking after all these years, because Della oiled the wood the way she oiled the flag's memory, and she would not let anyone move it so much as an inch. The second thing on the mantel was not a thing you could hold. It was a sentence. It was something Sam had written home, in one of the letters that came before the Fevers took the mail and the men both. He had written of a sergeant, a big Union man from Ohio who had carried Sam's watch inside his own coat through a summer of typhoid, so that if Sam died in the tents, the watch would find its way back to Wyoming and not into a stranger's pocket. Sam had written the man's kindness like a small thing. A line and a half. Della had read it once, folded it away, and half forgot it. She would remember it. but not yet. That autumn her days ran the same as they had run for 4 years. Up before the light. The stove, the coffee, the boys' breakfast. Out to the barn while the frost still whitened the rails. Ned at the corral with his hat pulled low, cussing gently at a lame gelding. The endless arithmetic of a place with more work than hands and more want than dollars. She was good at it. That was the trouble, in a way. She was good enough to keep the ranch alive, but not good enough to get ahead of it, and so it held her by the throat kindly, year on year, and she called that holding a life. Then came the Tuesday, and the bill on the table, and the ride to town. Let me tell you how the letter came, because it matters how a thing arrives. It came by a boy on a spotted pony, a company boy in a store-bought coat who would not get down and would not look her in the eye. He set the envelope on the table because she wasn't at the door quick enough to take it from his hand, and he said, "Compliments of the Cheyenne Cattle and Mortgage Company, ma'am." And he was gone before the words landed. She washed her hands before she touched it. That was her way. Whatever the world sent, she met it clean. The letter was thick with the kind of language that is built to make a plain person feel small. She caught the shape of it more than the words. There had been a debt. A note from the war years, from before, when Sam was raising money to stock the place and buy the water rights and start their whole married life. A war note, it called it, secured, and the deed to Blackwater Creek, it said, the very ground under her feet, had been pledged against that note. And the note was now held, by lawful transfer, by a man named Elias Vance. She read that name 4 times. It meant nothing to her. Elias Vance. It might as well have been a word in Greek. She did not cry. I want you to understand that about her, right here at the start, because it is the whole of who she was. Another woman might have sat down and wept, and no one would have faulted her. Della folded the letter along its creases, exactly, and she set it under the sugar tin so the wind through the door wouldn't take it, and she went out and saddled the buckskin and rode the 11 miles to Cedar Gap to make somebody read it to her true. Cedar Gap was one dusty street and a church at the end of it. A mercantile, a livery, a bank that was really just Pell's front room, a saloon that called itself a hotel. On a Tuesday, the porch of the mercantile held its usual congregation of men who worked hard 6 days and spent the 7th telling each other so. Horace Pell was waiting on that porch as if he had known she would come. Maybe he had. A man who deals in other people's ruin learns the timeable of grief. He was a soft-looking man, Pell, round in the face, careful in the clothes, a gold chain across a belly that had never missed a meal. He had a way of smiling that used only the bottom of his face. He came down the steps with his hat already in his hand, which was worse somehow than if he'd left it on, and he said, "Mrs. Marsh, I am so very sorry you had to read that letter alone." "Read it to me," she said. "The true of it." So he did, in front of all 11 of them. He read the numbers and the terms and the plain black fact that Sam Marsh had borrowed against the ranch in the war years and had never squared it, and that the paper had come, by the ordinary tides of commerce, into the hands of the company and then out of them again to this Vance. He read it slow. He read it kind. And every kind word was a nail. "You'll see, Mrs. Marsh," he said, when he was done, "that your late husband, God rest a brave man, signed this note with his own hand. And you signed nothing. You are not on the deed. You never were. Out here a wife holds what her husband's paper lets her hold, and no more." He folded the letter and held it out to her, and when she did not take it fast enough, he tucked it into her saddlebag himself, gentle as a undertaker. The Widow Marsh signed nothing, he said, and now he turned it out to the porch, to the 11, so it would carry. So the Widow Marsh keeps nothing. It's a hard law. But it's the law. Nobody on that porch said a word for her. Some looked at their boots. That was the worst of it, not the cruelty, but the 11 quiet men who let it stand. She did not answer him. She would think of 100 answers on the ride home and not one on the porch, and that is how it always goes. She gathered the reins. She sat straight in the saddle. She rode out of Cedar Gap with her chin level, and she did not let the buckskin trot until the town was well behind her and no one could see how her hands shook on the leather. That night, she did not sleep. She sat at the table, with the lamp turned low and Sam's letters spread in front of her, hunting for a note she could not read, for a debt she had never known. She found the line about the sergeant and passed right over it. She was looking for money. She did not yet know she was looking for a man. The man came 2 days later, up the wagon road, in the amber light of a late afternoon. Della saw the dust first, then the horse, a good deep-chested bay, trail thin. Then the rider. He came slow, the way a man comes who is not sure of his welcome and has decided to earn it by not pretending otherwise. She met him at the gate with Sam's shotgun broke over her arm, not raised, but there. Ned came up from the barn and stood off her shoulder with a set of ditching irons in his fist. Caleb she had sent inside, and he was watching from the window with both eyes big as dollars. The rider stopped a respectful 10 feet off. He looked at the shotgun. He looked at her. And then, before he said one word, he took off his hat. He was younger than she'd pictured, and older than his years. 39, maybe, lean as a fence rail, with a face that had been weathered down to the essentials, dark hair going iron at the temples, a mustache kept trim, eyes the brown of creek stones under water, and steady, and tired in a way that sleep would not touch. He wore a faded union coat with the chevrons picked off, and he wore it the way a man wears a thing he has earned and no longer wants. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low, and it did not push. "My name is Elias Vance." She had known it would be. She had known from the dust. Still the name landed in her chest like a stone dropped in a well. "Then you're the man come to put me off my land," she said. "No, ma'am." He turned his hat in his hands. "I'm the man that holds a paper. That's a different thing, though I grant it don't look it from where you're standing." He glanced past her, at the barn, at the still windmill standing dead against the sky with its blades hanging like a broken bird. "I've come a long way, Mrs. Marsh. I'd not blame you to run me off. But I'd ask you a thing first, and it's a small thing. Ask it then, and go." "Let me work here a week," he said. "No papers signed, no terms named. Nothing decided. I sleep in the barn, I take no wages, I eat what old Ned there eats and no better. And at the end of the week, whatever you say, I'll honor it." He looked at the windmill again. "That mill's been dead a while. Your stock's watering off the creek and the creek'll ice by December. I can have it turning by dark." Ned made a low sound in his throat, half a laugh, all disbelief. Della did not lower the gun, but she did not raise it either. "Why?" she said. "Just that." Something crossed his face and was gone before she could read it. "Because I owe a debt," he said, "not the one on that paper." Another, older, and that was all he would say, and there was iron under the quiet of it, and she understood she would not get more. She should have run him off. She had sworn to herself, at the table with the lamp low, that any man who came for Blackwater would meet Sam's shotgun and Sam's widow and go home lighter than he came. She had the gun. She had the right. Near enough. But water was water. And the creek would ice, and a curiosity had opened in her that pride could not quite close, a need to watch him, to see what a wolf did when you let it into the fold and pretended to look away. "The barn," she said. "You touch nothing in the house. You speak to my boy only if I'm standing there. You lay one hand toward that door." She tipped her head at the ranch house, at the deed, at her whole life. "And I'll fill you with birdshot and let Ned dig the hole." "Yes, ma'am," Elias Vance said. and he put his hat back on. And he rode past her to the dead windmill and got down and looked up at it a long while, reading it the way she'd seen Sam read a lame horse. By dark, the mill was turning. He'd found the trouble in the gears, where a cotter pin had sheared and let the whole train slip, and he'd forged a new pin cold on Ned's anvil by lamplight, and he'd climbed the tower in the last of the light, with the wind coming up, and freed the fan. Della heard it before she saw it. A groan, a shudder, and then the long, steady creak of blades coming round. And then, a sound she had not heard in 4 years, the gush and knock of water climbing the pipe and spilling into the stock tank. Caleb ran out in his nightshirt to see it, and she did not have the heart to send him back. The boy stood by the tank in the cold and watched the water come, and he looked up at the man on the tower against the last green of the sky. And Della saw the thing start in her son's face that would later be the crack the whole world tried to widen. Wonder, wanting, the bald hunger of a boy who has been fatherless 4 years watching a man make water run. Elias came down the tower. He wiped his hands on a rag. He looked at the water, not at the boy, not at her. "She'll want greasing come spring," he said, "and that leather in the pump's near gone. I'll see to it if I'm here." Then he went to the barn and shut the door, and did not come to the house, and did not ask for supper, though Della knew he had not eaten. She sent Caleb to bed. She stood a long time by the tank in the dark, listening to the water, hating how good it sounded. The deed was in his coat, she reminded herself. The whole week she reminded herself. It was in his hands. But he never once reached for the door. The week ran on, and the man worked. He worked the way water works, without hurry and without stopping, and things that had been broken for years came right under his hands. He reset the barn door so it swung true. He doctored the lame gelding with a poultice Ned grudgingly admitted he'd not thought to try. He rode fence and came back with a tally of every wire down and every post rotted, more than Della had known, and he said it plain, not to shame her, just so the truth was on the table. Ned thawed first. It happened over the anvil, the two of them mending a hinge, some talk of the war that Della didn't hear the start of. She only saw that by the 3rd day Ned had stopped watching Elias like a dog watches a stranger, and started handing him tools before he asked. That evening Ned said, low, at the stove, "That man soldiered. You can tell. He don't waste emotion, and he don't waste a word." He looked at her sidelong. "And he don't lie easy, Della. Some men, lying comes cheap, not that one. When he says nothing, it's because the saying would cost him, or because he's hiding the price of me," she said. Ned grunted and let it go. She did not thaw. She would not let herself. But she watched, and watching, she learned him against her will. She learned that he covered Caleb with his own blanket the night the boy fell asleep in the barn, watching him carve. She saw it through the crack of the door and pretended she hadn't. She learned he took the worst of the coffee and left her the good. She learned he set his hat on his knee when she came near and never once let his eyes go where they'd no business going. And she learned he had taken Sam's watch out of his pocket that first night and set it up on a nail in the barn where he could see it while he worked, the way a man keeps a picture of someone. She saw it, and her heart did something complicated, and she walked away fast. The week was nearly up when the town saw them together. It was the harvest social at the church, the one day in the season all the basin came down to Cedar Gap at once. Della had not meant to go. But there was flour to buy and thread and a winter's worth of nails, and the social was the only day the mercantile ran the wagons cheap, and a widow scraping bottom does not get to keep her pride and her flour both. So she hitched the wagon, and she brought Caleb scrubbed pink, and Elias asked was there aught she needed hauled, and she said the feed, curtly. And so it happened that Della Marsh drove into Cedar Gap on the biggest day of the year, with the stranger who owned her ranch riding beside her wagon. The whole basin saw it. She felt the looks like a change in the weather. The women by the church steps drew together, and their bonnets tipped toward each other. The men on the porch, the same 11, and more besides, went quiet as she passed, and loud again behind her. She heard the shape of the words without hearing the words. Widow, Vance, owns her place. Barely cold. Sam not 4 years in the ground. She kept her chin level. She had a great deal of practice keeping her chin level. Royce Ganton came across the yard to her before she'd got the brake set. Ganton ran the biggest spread east of the creek, and he ran it well, and he knew it. He was a handsome, prosperous man of 40, with a good coat and a good horse, and a courtesy so smooth it left no fingerprints. He had been circling Della for a year in the patient way of a man who thinks a widow is a field that will come to him if he only waits for the drought. Mrs. Marsh, he took her hand to help her down before she'd asked, and held it a half-beat past helping. I was grieved to hear of your trouble. The whole basin is. His eyes went to Elias, unhurried, measuring, and came back to her with the trouble tucked away behind a smile. But you needn't face it among strangers. A woman alone can lean on a neighbor without shame. My door's open to you, and my lawyer's too. We'd set this right. I'm not alone, Della said. I've Ned, and my boy. Of course. He smiled at the boy, who scowled. He did not smile at Elias. Only, a hired man is a hired man, and a company is a company. There are men in this, and you'll want a man of your own beside you when the dealing comes. He said it soft as butter. And under the butter she heard exactly what Pell had said on the porch, the very same appetite, only Ganton wore his in a good coat, and called it kindness. She thanked him with her mouth and nothing else, and went to buy her flour. Pell was in the churchyard too, of course, working the crowd, shaking the hands of men whose fences he held. He drifted near enough to tip his hat to her, and to say, just for her, under the noise, still smiling, "Enjoy the social, Mrs. Marsh. There won't be many more. The company does love a clean autumn." Then louder, for the bonnets, "You give my best to your houseguest." The word landed dirty on purpose. She saw a woman near her flush and turn away. Through all of it, Elias Vance said not one word in his own defense or hers. He unloaded the feed. He stood at the buckskin's head when the church bell startled her and the horse threw up its pole, and he steadied it with one hand and a low sound, and he stepped back the moment it was calm. He gave the town nothing to chew but the fact of him, standing quiet by her wagon, and let them chew that. On the ride home she was so angry she could hardly speak, angry at Ganton, at Pell, at the bonnets. Angry at Sam for dying, God forgive her. And angriest of all at the man beside her, who had let her be shamed in the whole basin's sight, and never opened his mouth. You could have said something, she burst out at last, halfway up the wagon road. You could have told them what you are. That you've not, that you don't mean to. She stopped, because she did not know what he meant to do, and that was the whole hell of it. He looked out at the darkening hills a while. What would you have had me say, Mrs. Marsh? The truth. Something in his face shut like a barn door in the wind. I've found, he said, quiet, that a man defending himself in a churchyard mostly just gives the churchyard more to hold against him. Your name's yours. I'll not spend it arguing over mine. And he would say no more, and she was left with her anger and no place to put it, which is the loneliest kind there is. That was the 25th day, near enough, of the account the whole basin was keeping. What she did not see, that week, was Pell coming to the barn. It was 2 evenings after the social. Della was in the house with Caleb. Ned had gone to his bunk. And Horace Pell rode up the wagon road in the dusk, alone, and found Elias Vance at the anvil, and got down without being asked. I know what passed, because Ned heard the most of it from the tack room where he'd gone for a strap, and Ned told Della, later, when it mattered. Pell did not waste courtesy on a man he took for a business partner. Vance, he said, you've held that paper what, a year? Come out to the ends of the earth to sit in a widow's barn and mend her mill for nothing. A sentimental man. I respect it. But sentiment don't bank. And he took an envelope from his coat, fat with it, and set it on the anvil. $2,000, cash, tonight. You sign the deed to the company and ride out a rich man, and the widow's my trouble, not yours. $2,000 for a paper and a clear conscience. There's not a court in the territory would look twice. $2,000. It was a fortune. It was more money than Sam had cleared off Blackwater in 10 years. It was enough to start over anywhere, free and clean, with no ghost of a dead man riding your shoulder. Elias Vance looked at the envelope a long time. Ned said you could hear the mill turning in the quiet. Then Elias said, "No, no." Pell's voice climbed. "You'll not get a better price. When the tax lien falls due, she can't pay it, and I take the place for pennies, and your paper's worth nothing behind the counties. 2,000 now, or not later. Be a man of sense." "I'm not a man of sense," Elias said. "Take your money off my anvil, Pell. You're getting soot on it." Pell took his money. He was a long time riding out, and he understood, Ned said, riding away, that Vance was not in it for a price. And a man who cannot be bought is the most dangerous kind there is to a man like Pell, and Pell went home and thought hard on how to move a man who would not be moved. He thought of the widow. He thought of what stood between them. And he began, that night, to plan the cruelest thing he had. But that was still weeks off. First came the norther. It came the way they come in that country, out of a blue sky, in an afternoon. The wind swung round to the north and hardened, and the temperature fell like a stone down a well, 30 degrees before supper, and the sky went the color of a dead fire. Della smelled it and knew. And she knew the worst of it, too, which was the 6 heifers heavy with their first calves, out in the far draw, too green to seek shelter, and too far along to drive fast. "They'll pile in the low ground and freeze," Ned said, pulling his coat. But Ned was 60-some, and his chest was bad in the cold, and they both knew it, and Della was already reaching for Sam's coat when Elias came in from the barn with his own collar up. "Where?" he said, not offering. "Just where the north draw. 6 of them. Heavy," she met his eyes. "It's a killing wind, Vance. A man could die in it, and no one find him till spring." "Then it's a poor night to argue about it," he said, and he was gone. He rode out into the white. She watched the storm take him inside of 50 yards, swallow horse and man whole, and then there was only the wind screaming round the eaves, and Caleb's frightened face and the long hours. He was gone all night. Della did not sleep. She kept the stove roaring and coffee on, and the lamp in the window like a fool, like it could reach him. Toward the black middle of the night the wind was so loud she couldn't hear herself pray. She thought of Sam. She thought, this is how it feels. This waiting. This is what the war was for me, only it never ended. And here I am doing it again, for a man I said I'd shoot. He came back gray with the dawn. He came walking, leading the bay, and behind the bay came the 6 heifers, stumbling and caked white but alive, and one wobbling new calf slung across the saddle, wrapped in Elias Vance's own coat. He had found them piled in the draw with the snow drifting over them, and he had dug them out and got them moving and turned them home, mile by frozen mile. In the dark, in the killing wind, in his shirt sleeves, because the coat had gone round the calf. He got the stock into the barn, he got the calf to the fire, and only when it was breathing steady and its mother licking it did he let Della see that he was hurt. He had gone down, somewhere in the dark, horse and all, on ice. She got that much out of him, which was more than he wanted to give. His shoulder had taken a fence brace or a rock, she never knew which. The shirt was stiff and dark over it. He'd said nothing all the while he worked the stock. He'd have said nothing still, and gone off to the barn to tend it himself like a hurt animal, if she had not put herself in the doorway. "Sit down," she said. "It's nothing, Mrs. Marsh, sit down before you fall down. I'll not have you bleeding on my clean floor." So he sat. And she cut the shirt away, and she saw it, the long tear over the shoulder, the flesh laid open, the old scars around it that told her plain this was not the first time this man had been broke and mended. She heated water. She threaded a needle. Her hands, that had shook on the porch in Cedar Gap, did not shake now. Nobody else saw it. Ned was in the barn, Caleb still asleep. It was only the two of them, the cold gray light, the fire ticking. She dressed the wound in silence, and he bore it in silence, and there was a thing that grew in that silence that neither of them would have named at gunpoint. She was the only one who ever saw that wound. She kept it, the way you keep a secret that isn't yours to tell, carefully, and closer than you mean to. "Why?" she said again, at last, tying off the bandage. The same word she'd met him with at the gate. 6 heifers. "You near died for 6 heifers that ain't even yours." He looked at the fire. "They're yours," he said. As if that answered it. As if that were the whole of the arithmetic, and always had been. She sat back on her heels and looked at this man and felt the ground she'd been so sure of tilt under her. Pell came 3 days later with the law in his hand. He had filed a water claim upstream. The company had, on land it held above hers, claiming the right to the creek before it reached Blackwater. And he brought worse. He brought a paper from the county. A tax lien. $216 in back taxes and fees on the ranch, due and payable within 40 days, or the county would sell Blackwater Creek on the courthouse steps to satisfy it. And the company, he did not have to say, would be the only bidder. $216. She did not have 20. She stood in her own doorway with the paper in her hand and the number swimming, and Pell tipped his hat and smiled his half-smile and said, "40 days, Mrs. Marsh. I'd count them careful," and rode away whistling. 40 days. That night, hunting through Sam's war papers again by the low lamp, hunting for anything. A receipt, a mercy, a mistake, she found the note. The real one. The war note that all of this hung from. And she made herself read it slow, every word she could, tracing the ones she couldn't with her finger. And at the bottom, she found Sam's hand. His own signature. She knew it like she knew his voice. Samuel A. Marsh, in the cramped, careful letters he made when a thing was important to him. He had signed it. Pell had told the truth about that much on the porch. Curse him. Sam had pledged the ranch. Her Sam, who had built this house with his hands, had put it up as security in the war. To a man, she read the second name now. Really read it for the first time. To one E. Vance. Elias Vance had not come out of nowhere. Sam had known him. Sam had trusted him with the deed to everything, and Sam had never once, in a single letter home, told her why. She sat with that a long time. The lamp burned down. Across the yard the barn window glowed, low, because the man out there worked late most nights now, and when she carried out the last of the coffee, because you feed a man who near died for your stock, pride or no pride, she saw what he was doing by the lamp. He was carving. He had Sam's unfinished horse in his hands, the cottonwood colt off her mantle, the one thing she'd let no living soul move an inch in 4 years. And her whole body went cold and then hot, and the first word up her throat was rage. How dare he? That was Sam's. That was Caleb's. That was hers. But she stopped in the dark outside the window, and she watched. He was not whittling it careless. He was reading it first, the way he'd read the windmill and the lame horse and the fences, turning it to the lamp, following the marks Sam had already made, learning the dead man's intention before he laid steel to it. And then he freed the hind leg. Just the one leg, the one Sam had left trapped in the block. He worked it out with tiny cuts, patient as prayer, matching Sam's own hand so close you couldn't tell where the dead man stopped and the living one took up. He blew the dust off. He set it back where a running horse's leg should be, and he looked at it, and something moved in his hard, tired face that she would remember the rest of her life. She did not go in. She set the coffee on the step where he'd find it, and she went back to the house and she cried, finally, 4 years late, for the first time since the graveside, quietly, in Sam's coat, at Sam's table, over a wooden horse and a debt she had spent a week hating a good man for. In the morning, she made her decision. She'd sworn she would run him off with Sam's shotgun. The 40 days were bleeding away. The sensible thing, the Ganton thing, the thing the whole basin would have nodded at, was to send the stranger packing before he tangled her deeper, and go crawling to a good coat and let a man of her own do her dealing. Instead, she went to the barn where he was gathering his things to ride fence, and she carried something in both hands. It was Sam's tools, the good ones, the chisels and the plane and the draw knife Sam had kept oiled in a wooden box, the tools that had raised this house, that no man had touched since. She had lain awake half the night with them in her lap, deciding she held them out to Elias Vance. He looked at the box. He looked at her. He did not reach for it. "The branding's on us in 3 weeks," she said. Her voice was not quite steady, and she made it be. "The corral's down where the norther took it. There's a hay cut yet to get in before the next storm, and Ned can't swing a maul anymore, though he'd die before he'd say it. I can't hold this place with 2 hands and a boy." She pushed the box an inch toward him. "I'm not asking a hired man. And I'm not asking my debt holder. I don't know yet what you are to me, Vance, or what Sam was to you, and there's 40 days I might lose it all regardless." She swallowed. "But if I go down, I'll go down having built it with 2 pairs of hands and not 1. Stay through the branding. Not for the paper. As my partner. Take Sam's tools and stay." For a long moment the barn was so quiet she heard the mill turning out in the wind. And then Elias Vance reached out, slow, the way a man reaches for something he does not believe he has any right to hold, and he took the box of a dead man's tools from the hands of the dead man's widow. His fingers closed on the wood. His jaw worked once. "Mrs. Marsh," he started, low. And there was a thing behind it. A weight. A truth climbing up in him at last. She could see it. Could see him deciding whether to lay the whole of it down right there on the barn floor between them. About Sam. About Franklin. About why he'd really come, and what the watch on the nail truly meant, and what a man owes when another man dies with his name on his lips. He drew a breath to say it. And out in the yard, thin on the cold wind, came the sound of a wagon on the wagon road. More than 1 horse, harness jingling, coming up fast toward the house. Coming with purpose. Della turned toward the barn door, the tools still warm between their 4 hands, and through the gap she saw the dust rising gold in the morning light, and at the head of it, sitting his buggy straight-backed and smiling that half-smile, rode Horace Pell. And he had brought men with him. Elias set the box of tools down on the anvil. Slow, he straightened, and the truth that had been climbing up in him went back down behind his teeth, folded away for another hour. He looked at Della once. Then he walked out into the yard to meet the men. There were 4 of them behind Pell's buggy. Riders, hard-faced, the kind a company keeps on the payroll for the work that isn't ledgers. Pell sat up front, straight-backed, smiling that half-smile like a man arriving at a table already set for him. "Sergeant Vance," Pell said, "you're a hard man to find on your own land. It isn't my land," Elias said. "No?" Pell let the word hang. He climbed down from the buggy, unhurried, and looked past Elias to where Della stood in the barn door with Sam's coat on her shoulders. "The paper says otherwise. The paper says a great deal." He drew a breath of the cold morning like he owned the air, too. "I've come to be neighborly. The county lien on this place comes due in 3 weeks now. $216, Mrs. Marsh, and I don't believe you have it. Della came off the barn threshold. You'll get off my ground." "Your ground." Pell smiled wider. "There's that word again." Elias moved. Not fast. He just stepped so his shoulder came between Pell and the woman, easy as a gate swinging to. You said your piece, he told Pell. Now hear mine. There's nothing here you're buying today. Not the deed. Not the note. Not her. Take your riders back down the wagon road. Pell's eyes went over him, slow, weighing. You refused $2,000, he said. A man doesn't refuse $2,000 unless he's playing for the whole basin. He shook his head, almost sorrowful. Or unless there's something in it money can't square. Which is it, Sergeant? He let that sit. Then, quieter, so it carried anyway, ask him about Franklin, ma'am. Ask him about the December of '64. When you're ready to know what he really is, you come find me. I'll have the truth waiting. He climbed back into his buggy. He tipped his hat to Della like a gentleman. The riders wheeled, and the whole of them went back down the road in a rising skirt of gold dust, and the yard was quiet again, but for the mill turning in the wind. Della stood a long time looking at the empty road. What did he mean, she said. Franklin. Elias didn't answer. His jaw worked once. And she saw the truth crest in him again, and again go down, and she hated that she'd seen it, and hated worse that she let him keep it. Nothing a man wants told in a dooryard, he said finally. Della, it was the first he'd used her name. She noticed it, and pretended she hadn't. She turned and went into the house, and left the tools on the anvil for him to carry in himself. The days went short after that, the way they do in the mountains that time of year. The aspens up the draw went from green to gold to bare inside a week, and the frost stayed on the north fences till noon. And Elias Vance stayed. He mended the corral first. The near rail had been down since Sam's last summer, the post rotted at the ground line, and no man Della could spare had ever set it right. Elias dug the old post out with Sam's spade, and cut a new one from the cottonwood down by the creek, and set it in tamped rock so it stood true. Ned watched him do it. Ned didn't offer to help, being past the swinging of a maul and too proud to say so. But when the rail was hung, the old man ran his hand along it, and grunted, and that grunt was the warmest thing he'd said to a stranger in 4 years. Then, Elias put Caleb on a horse. The boy had ridden double behind his mother his whole life. He'd never sat a horse alone. Elias took the old gray mare, the gentlest thing on the place, and he set Caleb up on her bear back in the mended corral, and he walked alongside with a handlight on the boy's knee. Sit down into her, he said. Don't grip with your heels, you'll only tell her to run. Let your legs hang long and easy. That's it. That's a rider. Caleb's face was solemn as a churchgoer's. He gripped the mane, then let it go when Elias told him to, and he sat that mare walking a slow circle in the cold, and something opened in his face that Della, watching from the kitchen window with her hands gone still in the dishwater, had not seen in her son for 4 years. He looked like a boy who was not afraid. He looked like a boy with a man walking beside his horse. That night Caleb couldn't stop talking about it. Elias this and Elias that, and how a rider sits down into a horse, and could he do it again tomorrow? And Della said we'll see, and put him to bed, and stood in the dark of his little room longer than she needed to. When she came out, Elias was at the mantel. He had the carved horse in his hands, Sam's unfinished colt, the one Sam had been cutting the winter he shipped east and never finished. Elias had done the trapped hind leg already, matched to Sam's own hand so close you couldn't find the seam. Now he was working the mane with the smallest of the chisels, easy, by the last of the firelight. You'll wake him if you go on, she said. I'm near done. He turned it in the light. He wanted it finished. The boy, he asked me. Della sat down across the cold stove from him. She didn't mean to. Her feet just took her there, and they sat, the two of them, in the dark house, with a boy asleep in the next room, and a dead man's colt taking shape between them, and neither said a word for a long while, and the not saying was easier than talking had been in years. The lean days went down like sand. 3 weeks. Then a fortnight. Della kept the count on the doorframe with a pencil mark, a stroke a day, and every morning she made the stroke, and every morning the wall told her plainer that $216 was not a thing she had, nor a thing she could raise, not with 200 head on a good year, and this year no good year at all. But there was the hay. The last cutting stood down in the creek meadow, dry and ready, and there was weather coming. You could smell it off the peaks. That iron edge, that stillness. If the hay went to weather, it rotted in the swath, and the stock starved come February, and the company wouldn't need any lean at all. They'd just wait for the crows. Everyone in the basin knew it. Della suspected the company was counting on it. Horace Pell struck her as a man who could read a sky. Elias read it too. He was up before light. He had the mower going with the first gray, Ned raking behind, Caleb turning windrows with a fork near as big as he was, and Della on the wagon with the team. They worked that meadow like the storm was a creditor at the gate, which it was. No dinner, coffee drunk standing. The sun went over and started down, and the iron smell got stronger, and the peaks went blue-black, and still they pitched hay, load after load, up the ramp and into the loft, the sweetness of it thick in the cold air. They got the last fork of it under the barn roof as the first hard flakes came slanting across the yard. Elias stood in the loft door looking out at the coming white, sweat frozen in his collar, chest heaving. Della climbed the ladder and stood beside him. Below them, the barn was packed to the rafters with feed enough to carry the herd. Outside, the storm the company had banked on came down over Blackwater Creek and found nothing left to ruin. "Elias," she said, "come eat." He turned and looked at her. His name in her mouth had stopped him cold. And there in the loft door with the snow coming down gold in the last light, they stood close enough that she felt the warmth come off him, close enough that a hand might have moved and been met. Neither hand moved. But the wanting to was in the air between them plain as the cold, and both of them knew it, and both of them looked back out at the snow rather than say so. At supper, Ned Buckley did a thing nobody had seen him do. He raised his cup of coffee across the table. To the man, the old hand said, gruff, not looking at anyone, "Sam would have liked him. That's all I got to say on it." And he drank, and set the cup down hard, and glared at his plate like he'd said too much. Elias didn't answer, but something in his face broke a little, and mended, and Della saw it, and looked away to give it to him private. That was the good week. She would think back on it after, and know it for the good week, the one before the town. The trouble came on a Saturday, in Cedar Gap, at the Mercantile. She'd ridden the 11 miles in for salt and coffee and cartridges, and Elias had come along to see about a barrel of nails, and they'd made the ride together the way they'd made 100 small tasks together by then. Easy, not talking much, the wagon wheels loud on the frozen road. And there on the store porch, where the whole basin gathered of a Saturday, stood Horace Pell. And around him, the way there is always a crowd for a hanging, stood 11 men of Cedar Gap, the same 11, or near enough, who had stood on that porch weeks before and heard Pell tell her the Widow Marsh signed nothing and kept nothing. She knew their faces. They knew hers. Mrs. Marsh, Pell called out, warm as a friend. And the good sergeant. How fortunate. I've been meaning to settle a debt of honesty with the both of you, and here's a porch full of witnesses to see it done fair. Della's hand tightened on the wagon brake. Say it and let us pass, Pell. Oh, I'll say it. He came to the top of the steps. He had the crowd now, and he knew how to hold a crowd. You've all watched this widow take a stranger onto her place, a man who holds the paper on her land, and you've wondered, as I've wondered, why a debt holder plays the hired hand, why he refused a fortune for that deed. He smiled at Elias. You never told her. Did you, Sergeant? 4 years and you never told her how her husband died. The porch went quiet. Della felt the cold go up her spine that had nothing to do with the weather. Franklin, Pell said, tasting it. The Battle of Franklin, Tennessee, December of 1864. Corporal Sam Marsh's regiment broke, and a Union sergeant went down in the open with the rebels closing, and Corporal Marsh, a man who had a wife and a boy and a ranch in Wyoming Territory to live for, Corporal Marsh went back out into that fire and put his own body over that sergeant to shield him, and took the ball that was meant for another man. Pell turned to her, and his voice went soft, and that softness was the cruelest thing in it. Sam Marsh didn't die for his country, ma'am. He died for him. That sergeant is standing on your wagon. That's the man your husband bled out for in the mud. And with his last breath, your Sam pressed the deed of this ranch into that man's hand. The whole porch was looking at her. 11 men. She could not breathe. He didn't buy your ranch, ma'am, Pell said, gentle as a knife. He owes you a corpse. He's been living in your barn and eating at your table and teaching your fatherless boy to ride, the boy whose father he got killed, and he never once told you why. He spread his hands to the crowd. I only thought you had a right to know what you'd taken in. Della turned to Elias. He had gone the color of ash. He was not looking at Pell. He was looking at her, and he did not deny a word of it. That was the thing that broke her. He did not say Pell twisted it, did not say it happened otherwise, did not say a single word in his own defense. He just sat there and let it be true, because it was true, and the truth of it was written all over his ruined face. Is it so? She said, very low. Only for him. Franklin, Sam went back for you. Della. Is it so? Yes. Elias said, it's so. She looked at him a long moment. Around them the town watched, and Pell watched, and the snow began again. Soft. Spitting down out of a low sky onto the frozen street. When she spoke it was quiet, and it did not shake, and it was the worst thing he had ever heard, worse than any anger, because there was no anger in it, only grief laid bare in front of 11 men. You let me feed you, she said. You let me sit across my dead husband's stove from you, and never once say that he died with your name in his mouth. You let my boy love you. And you knew. All this while, you knew how Sam died, and you let me not know. Her voice did not rise. Whatever you came here to pay, Miss Vance, it isn't a debt I want paid. Get off my land. Go on to whatever the county seat holds for you, but get off Blackwater Creek, and don't let my sons see you go. Elias Vance climbed down off the wagon. He stood in the falling snow with his hat in his hands. He looked like he might say the whole of it then, the last of it, the thing he'd been climbing toward in the barn. And then he looked at her face and saw there was no room left in it for his voice, and he put his hat on. All right, he said. All right, Della. He turned and he walked down the frozen street toward the livery, alone, and got his horse and rode east out of Cedar Gap in the falling snow, toward the county seat. And every man on that porch believed the same thing and said it to his neighbor before Elias was clear of the town, that the sergeant had finally quit the pretending and gone to sell that deed to Horace Pell for the $2,000 and get shut of the widow and her worthless dust for good. Horace Pell believed it too. It was the only outcome his ledger allowed for. He tipped his hat to the crowd, well pleased, a man who had split what he could not buy. Della drove home in the dark with her son asleep against her side and the salt and the coffee in the wagon bed, and she did not weep, because she had buried a husband with a folded flag of 13 folds and learned 4 winters ago that weeping did not water stock nor pay a lien. But something in her would not lie down. That night, with Caleb in his bed, she stood at the mantel where the finished colt now stood. Elias had left it there, mane and all, the whole horse done at last, and she could not make the pieces sit right. A man who plays a long game does not spend himself in a norther for another man's cattle. A man playing for the basin does not put a fatherless boy on a horse and walk beside him in the cold. A man who wants the deed does not refuse $2,000 for it. She thought of the watch. Sam's watch. Elias had brought it back with him, had set it that first week on the nail on the barn wall, and there it had hung since, and she had never once been able to look at it straight. It was Sam's. Sam had carried it to the war, and it had come home in the pocket of the man who'd caused his death. No. In the pocket of the man Sam died saving. She was no longer sure which was the truth and which was Pell's shape of it. She took a lantern and crossed the black yard to the barn. The mill turned overhead. She lifted the watch down off the nail. It was heavy and cold in her hand, the case worn smooth by Sam's thumb across 1,000 days. She opened it. There was the face, stopped, and behind the face, folded so small it had ridden 4 years unnoticed in the case, was a scrap of paper. Sam's hand. She knew it the way she knew her own. She carried it into the light of the lantern and unfolded it with fingers that had stopped being steady. Della, it read. If this comes to you, and I don't, it comes by a man named Vance. Sergeant Elias Vance. He carried me 2 miles out of the fire at Franklin, with his own shoulder torn through, when carrying a dead man cost him plenty and gained him nothing. I gave him the deed to hold, not to keep, to bring it home to you, and to see the place stayed ours if the note ever came calling. He'll try to tell you it's a debt he owes. Don't you believe it. He owes nothing. I owe him the 2 miles. Let the man who carried me home have a place at your table, Della, if he ever comes. He's a good man and a lonely one, and he'll think he's got no right to sit down. Make him sit down. Your Sam. Della Marsh stood in the cold barn with her husband's hand in one fist and his stopped watch in the other, and for the first time in 4 winters she wept, standing up, alone, in the lantern light, with the mill turning over her head. He carried me home. Let him have a place at the table. Make him sit down. And she had put him out into the snow in front of the whole town. She was on the road before first light. The county seat was a hard day's ride east, and she made it by the middle of the afternoon. The mare lathered, Caleb left with Ned and a note. She came into the town not knowing what she'd find, only knowing she had to find it before a signature dried, and the street outside the county land office was full of horses. Pell's buggy, Ganton's fine bay, and a knot of Cedar Gap men who had ridden the same road she had to see the sergeant sell the widow's ranch out from under her, because a thing like that is worth a day's ride to watch. She pushed through the door. Inside, the land office was close and warm, with a stove going and the light gone amber through the one window. The county clerk sat behind his high desk with the great transfer ledger open in front of him. Horace Pell stood at the desk in his good coat, hat in hand, prosperous and certain. Royce Ganton stood a little apart, arms folded, come to see the widow made available. And there before the desk, still in his trail coat with the snow melting off it, stood Elias Vance. The deed was on the desk, open, and beside it lay Sam's war note, the paper Sam had signed in a field hospital pledging the ranch, and Elias had a pen in his hand. Name your price, Sergeant, Pell was saying, smooth and low, and he had a company draft already half filled in his other hand. 2,000 was a neighborly offer. Say 2,200, and we'll call the tax lien settled between us, and everybody rides home happy. You get your money. I get my water. And the widow. He shrugged. The widow marries Mr. Ganton here and keeps a roof over the boy. Everyone provided for. Sign it over to the company. And it's done. Elias looked at the pen in his hand. He looked at the deed. Then he bent to the ledger, and the whole room leaned with him, and he did not sign it to the company. Clerk, Elias said. You'll write this how I say it, and you'll read it back so these men hear every word. He set the pen to the page. The deed to the property known as Blackwater Creek and all its water and range is conveyed entire, in fee, clear of the war note and every claim upon it, to Della Marsh, in her own name, to her and to her son Caleb Marsh after her. The clerk's pen stopped. The room had gone dead silent, but for the stove. Write it, Elias said. The clerk wrote it. And Elias Vance took Sam's war note off the desk, the note that had bound the ranch, the note worth $2,000 of Horace Pell's money and every acre of water in the basin, and he tore it across. And across again. And he let the pieces fall on the clerk's desk like the first of the snow coming down outside. "There's your price, Pell," he said. Quiet. He wasn't even angry. That was the terrible part, for Pell. There was no heat in it at all. "Your husband bought this ranch twice, Della, for she was in the doorway now, and he had seen her, and he said it to her though he'd meant it for the room, once with money and once with his life. I only rode here to make sure it stayed bought. That's the whole of the debt. It's paid." Then he reached into his coat and laid a fold of banknotes on the desk beside the torn pieces of the war note. $216, he told the clerk. The county lien on Blackwater Creek. Back wages I never drew, and an army pension I never spent. Mark it paid in full, and stamp the transfer, and let these men witness it's the widow's land clean and clear before I leave this room. The clerk counted the money. He entered it. He inked the great seal and brought it down on the page, and in the falling of that stamp, Horace Pell's whole design came down with it. Pell did not speak at first. His company draft was still in his hand, still half-filled, worth nothing now. His mouth kept the shape of the smile a moment after the rest of his face had left it. And then even the shape went, and what was under it was an ugly, ordinary want, exposed, the water claim he got out. The upstream claim, I filed, is void. The clerk didn't even look up. Junior to the Marsh right by 4 years. It was void the day you filed it, Mr. Pell. I told your man so. He said file it anyhow. The clerk closed the ledger. The company's got no hold on Blackwater Creek. Nor on the basin, I'd guess, once this gets told. Pell's hand closed on the draft and crushed it. He looked around the room for one man to meet his eye and found none. Then he put on his hat and went out into the cold without another word, and the crowd at the door parted to let him through the way men part for something they no longer fear. Royce Ganton buttoned his coat. He had come to court a widow with a failing ranch and a debt around her neck, and he found instead a woman who owned her water free and clear with the whole basin about to know how she'd got it, and beside her a man who'd torn up a fortune rather than let her fall. Ganton was too shrewd to stay a suitor a minute past the arithmetic. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, with a small stiff bow. "My congratulations on your good fortune." And he withdrew his offer and his courtesy in the same breath, and put on his hat and left. Near the door, old Ned Buckley, who had ridden the day's ride too, saying nothing to anyone, half wages and all, took off his hat. He held it against his chest. He did not say a word. He didn't need to. He'd said his piece over the coffee weeks before, and this was the same thing said quieter. Elias set down the pen. He looked worn to the bone, a man who has done the last thing he came a long way to do, and has no next thing to walk toward. He looked at Della in the doorway, and something in him braced for her to still be holding the town's grief against him. But she crossed the room to him, and she took his hand, the one that had held the pen, and turned it over, and pressed into it the small stopped watch and the scrap of paper folded so long it had gone soft at the creases. "I found what Sam left in it," she said. Her voice was low, and it did not shake. "I know what you carried out of Franklin. And I know what he asked of me. And I've done the exact opposite of it in front of the whole of Cedar Gap, and I've come a day's ride to set it right." She closed his fingers over the watch. "He said make you sit down. He said you'd think you had no right to." Her eyes were wet and steady. "You've got the right, Elias. Come home." They rode back into Blackwater Creek 2 days later in the first true snow of the winter. The kind that comes down soft and stays, that lays a clean white quilt over a scraped hard place and makes it look, for a while, like mercy. Caleb came running out from the house before the horses reached the gate, floundering through the new snow, and he did not run to his mother first. He ran to Elias, and Elias stepped down and caught the boy up, and the boy held on the way a boy holds on to a thing he was afraid he'd lost. And over the boy's shoulder, Elias looked at Della, asking, and Della looked back and did not look away. And that was answer enough. That evening, there was a lit house at Blackwater Creek. Firelight in the windows, gold on the snow. Della set the table for four. For four, a thing that had not happened in that house in 4 winters, and Ned came in stamping his boots, and the boy could not sit still, and Elias stood a moment in the doorway with his hat in his hand like a man not sure of his welcome. And Della looked up from the stove. "Sit down, Elias," she said. "You're letting the cold in." And he sat down. Later, when the boy was asleep and Ned gone to the bunkhouse and the fire burned low, Della took down a thing she'd carried home from the county seat and hung it on a nail she'd driven into the wall above the door. It was the deed, conveyed to Della Marsh, in fee, clear, her name, in the clerk's good hand, where any soul who came through that door would read it. She stood back and looked at it in the firelight a long while. On the mantel below it stood the cottonwood colt, finished now, both hind legs freed, the mane cut fine, a running horse carved by 2 men's hands 4 years apart, and neither of them able to see it done alone. Caleb had carried it to bed, and then thought better of it, and set it there where his pa's watch used to sit, where it could be seen. At the fence line the next dusk, with the snow gone blue in the last light, and their breath hanging in the cold, Della and Elias stood at the top rail, looking out over the white range, where 200 head would winter on hay he'd cut. He had his coat on. He had, she noticed, a look about him that hadn't fully left since the land office, the look of a man who has paid his debt and now isn't sure he's allowed to stay for the rest of it. "You don't owe us anything anymore," she said. "You know that. The note's torn. The lien's paid. You could ride anywhere from here and no man could say you left a thing undone. I know it," he said, "so there's no debt keeping you." She put her hand on the top rail, near his, not quite touching. "If you stay now, it can't be because you owe it. It has to be because you want to." Elias Vance looked out over the ranch a man had died to keep, that he'd spent himself to save and then given away entire, and he did not answer with any of the long truth he'd carried up from Franklin. He'd said all of that. There was one word left, and it wasn't his to say. He'd learned that much. So he waited, and Della Marsh, who had run this place alone for 4 winters and sworn she'd go down with 2 hands before she'd lean on any, turned to the man beside her and said the word herself. "Stay." He took off his hat, held it a moment, and set it back on his head, settled, like a man deciding where he lived. And he put his hand over hers on the cold top rail and left it there. And that was the whole of it. No more than that. A hand over a hand at a fence line in the first snow, which out here is as much as most true things ever say out loud. By spring, the Cheyenne Cattle and Mortgage Company pulled out of the basin altogether. Horace Pell was not heard of in Cedar Gap again, and the notes he'd held on every neighbor's fence went quiet. The way a threat goes quiet once the men behind it learn it can be beaten. Blackwater Creek ran black cattle on green grass that summer, and the branding got done as partners, the way she'd asked in the barn with a dead man's tools in her hands. 2 pairs of hands, and not one. Some debts you pay with money. Some you pay with your life, the way Sam did, out in the fire at Franklin. And some, the deepest kind, you can only ever pay by staying. Elias Vance stayed. He carried a man home from the war, and then he carried the man's whole world through the hardest winter it had, and set it down safe, and then, at last, he let himself be carried too, to a table with his name on the welcome, in a house whose deed hung by the door in a widow's name, under a carved horse that ran and never left the mantle. That's the story of Della Marsh, and the veteran who held her land and gave it back, and the war debt that only love could settle. If you're still with me out here at the fence line, I'd take it kindly if you'd comment the town you're watching from tonight. I want to know how far Blackwater Creek has ridden. Thank you for staying to the end.